Welcome to Love and Purity Podcast. Aaron Hood here. It's good to be back, and I've got Victoria Hood with me. We're going to be in Parshat Devarim. So, Devarim, the first portion in the book of Deuteronomy, and it's just really interesting. Deuteronomy, is a Greek word meaning a second law, and it comes from, I believe, chapter 17 of Deuteronomy. I may talk about this a little bit later. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. But it's actually not a second law. It means like the recounting or the words is actually the Deuteronomy. The Greek word comes from second law. And as we know that this is actually just a recounting. Devarim, the Hebrew word, means the words. And it comes from the first verse of the portion, starting into Moses' long dissertation about what they've gone through. It starts in Deuteronomy chapter 1, and this portion goes through till chapter 3, verse 22. The Haftorah is Isaiah 1 through 27, and then the New Testament portion is Matthew 24, 1 through 22. So we'll be going through there. Some of these probably focusing more in Deuteronomy today, but we just want to read the first verse of the portion as we get into this. These are the words which Moses spoke to all Israel on this side of the Jordan in the wilderness, in the plain opposite Suf, between Paran, Tophel, Laban, Hazarot, and Dizachav. So tell the words. And so the first sentence that we have right out of the gate here is Moses going over, speaking all of the great things that the Lord has done for them. And so as I was going through this, I realized that life is a story, and it's very important for us to tell that story. And the purpose of that is to remember, recall to mind. I looked up what does it mean to remember in the Webster's Dictionary. It says recall to mind. And as I was thinking about how often I'm going to read a couple verses here. A lot of them are actually in Deuteronomy because it seems like the purpose of the book is to help us to remember creation, Abraham, right? It's going back over. Moses specifically starts out, though, with the deliverance out of Egypt. And he's talking about their journey through the wilderness. And for us, I feel like that's speaking to, there's so many people that are kind of trying to forget. And, sometimes it's healthy, not to remember the brokenness of the past. And I don't think that's the purpose. I think remembering is actually remembering the great things that God has done for you, his deliverances for you, like out of Egypt.
I was just thinking about the Revelation that said they overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. So that same kind of idea is like we overcome by remembering what God's done in our life.
Our testimony. And I think it's just so important. A lot of people, we get busy, we get caught up, in one thing or another, and we don't have the constant remembrance of the goodness of God. And it's got to be a goodness that's in our life. I mean, we can appreciate it in others and encourage one another in that. The word of our testimony encourages others. But the main purpose of it is actually for us to remember the good things that God has done in our life. So I want to read a few verses about remembering here in Deuteronomy 5:15. It says, "And remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there by a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day." So even the Sabbath day is for the purpose of remembering. And you shall, this is Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 18, "And you shall not be afraid of them, but you shall remember well what the Lord your God did to Pharaoh and to all Egypt." Deuteronomy 8, verse 2, "And you shall remember that the Lord your God led you all the way these 40 years in the wilderness to humble you and test you, to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not." And so, there's this saying that says, those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And I feel like in this season with a lot of anxiety in our country and abroad, that it is important for us to remember the lessons of the past. And so as we're not doomed to repeat those same mistakes. And I feel like even in our personal lives, there's this constant need to daily remind ourselves of the greatness and power of God. And it's not purely from other people's stories. That's encouraging, and it's an element of it, part and parcel. But it is our own remembering our own story. Waking up in the morning is one of the, Hear, O Israel, Lord God, the Lord is one. You shall remember, right? I think in right after the Shema in Deuteronomy 6, I believe it is, it goes on to say that you shall remember the Lord your God and keep the law of God and before your on your forehead, and bind it around your arm. Be frontless between your eyes, and seal. Or just talking about how we see all things through this word, and the purpose of the word is to cause us to remember the great things the Lord has done for us. Let's read a couple more verses here in Deuteronomy 8, verse 2. And you shall remember that the Lord your God led you all the way through these 40 years in the wilderness to humble you and to test you and to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandment or not. He led them in the wilderness these 40 years. It says here to test them, to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. He's wanting to find, it's important for us to remember the purpose, right? It's not only that we're just remembering the situations, right? There's a lesson learned in each situation that we go through, and we can, and typically, this is something that I'm speaking to myself here, is that we get we have lots of things we could do, and we miss actually learning the lesson from the situations that we're in because we have so much to do. We can't properly, it's as if a father with his son's continually trying to do the right thing, but he keeps messing up because he's not remembering or hearing the instructions of his father. He messes up and his father gives him an instruction, and he continues to try and do it. And he's really desiring to do a good job. He's trying hard and he wants to do the right thing, but he's not learning from his past mistakes, and he's making the same mistake over and over, or different mistakes that he could have avoided if he had heard the instructions from the previous mistake. And so this analogy is, this whole father and son relationship, the bride, bridegroom, these are all pictures for us to learn from our Father in heaven, from our bridegroom, Yeshua, how we are to relate. And in this portion, it is full of this remembrance, the whole idea behind it, I believe. And as we go through, we might find more verses and more depth, because as we're seeing, it's really just a recount. Like, it's not a whole lot of, there's some new information in there. And so as we go through, we're really, the whole purpose of the book is for us to remember the great things the Lord did for us in Egypt, how he destroyed the firstborn of Egypt, brought them through the sea, and how he delivered them, granted them water, fed them with manna. It goes on and on and on about remembering these things that the Lord has done. Got one more verse here, or a couple more verses. In Deuteronomy chapter 9, verse 7, remember, do not forget. That's kind of saying the same thing over, right? In a different way. How you provoked the Lord your God to wrath in the wilderness from the day that you departed from the land of Egypt until you came to this place. You have been rebellious against the Lord. We are to remember our faults. I remember my faults this day, I believe is what Job said as he was being...
I think that was the butler in
yes,
Egypt.
the butler in Egypt. Yes, not Job. Correction. See, this is a great example of a marriage relationship. She helps me stay in line. So I remember my faults this day was what the butler said after, or the baker, one of those, after they had been thrown in prison, and or it was the butler, because he was standing before Pharaoh, and Pharaoh says, I've had this dream, and the butler says, I remember my faults this day. I know a man who can interpret dreams. And from that, Joseph is brought out of the jail to interpret the dreams. So we are to remember our faults, not to wallow in the self-pity or the shame or the guilt. I don't believe that's healthy, but to remember the deliverance and how we need the Lord. And it's really a critical element for us to be delivered from pride. If we don't remember our faults, we can be delusioned into believing that we have no faults. And then therefore our hearts being lifted up in pride and self-righteousness.
I was just thinking about how like remembering those faults can make you just feel like, okay, there's a better way to do things. And I just think of that specifically with our parents. that they had a lot of brokenness in their past in relationships, and is a huge reason why I'm talking about love and purity, why we have chosen,
right.
why we have chosen, a different route than the world because of the brokenness that our parents experienced. So it's not for, they didn't say, oh, we messed up, we're always going to be terrible, we're all, we're just doomed.
Just doomed. Do the same thing.
They said, we don't want that for our children. Let's try something different. And that's brought major fruit and blessing to our lives. And we're so thankful for that.
Right. I mean, it's amazing how the Lord, it says that he takes what the enemy meant for evil and he turns it for our good. It's insanity, right? The definition of insanity is trying the same things and expecting different results. And if we do not learn from our mistakes, then we will continue to go into the same mistakes and not learn from them. And so it's an interesting point, is that it was actually from a place of brokenness, a place of, this is not what we believe God has for us according to his word. And so from that suffering and pain comes forth the beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning. God turns it over, and a large part of it is remembering how he's delivered us, right? Out of darkness into his marvelous light. Deuteronomy 15:15 says, you shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and Lord your God redeemed you. Therefore, I command you this thing today. Deuteronomy 16:3, you shall eat no leavened bread. With it 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. With it is the bread of affliction, for you came out of the land of Egypt in haste, that you may remember the day in which you came out of the land of Egypt all the days of your life. It's unleavened bread, Passover, that you may remember the day. Right, we do this every year. Unleavened bread, Passover, Sukkot. Passover, in particular, is for the purpose of remembering. The entire feast is, you tell it to your children, and they tell it to their children, and you talk of it. And when they ask you these questions, you say, it was when we were slaves in Egypt. Remember, and Deuteronomy 16:12, and you shall remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and you shall be careful to observe these statutes. Deuteronomy 24:9, remember what the Lord your God did to Miriam on the way when you came out of Egypt. Deuteronomy 24:18, but you shall remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you from there. Therefore, I command you to do this thing. See, it says you remember, and sometimes we can say we can just remember the slave, right? But it says you were a slave in Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you from there, right? It's not a dead end. It's not a story. It's not only a bad story, right? We remember Abraham. We remember his faith. We remember Moses and his humility. We remember, and out of each one of these men, Abraham for his faith and Moses for his humility, each one walked contrary to that at one place in their life. And we learn from that, right? Okay, going forward, like I said, there's so much here in Deuteronomy. I'm just reading through here. In Deuteronomy 25:17, remember what Amalek did to you on the way as you're coming out of Egypt. So this is like a revenge, not necessarily they're accomplishing revenge, but even remembering the evil that was done to you that on the way as you're coming out of Egypt, and our response. Obviously, there's situations where we not want to hold a grudge, but this is saying, remember what Amalek did to you on the way as you were coming out of Egypt. Deuteronomy 32:7, remember the days of old, consider the years of many generations. Ask your father, and he will show you, your elders, and they will tell you. There's a reason why elders are supposed to be of a certain age, because they have stories to tell. You want to talk about Uncle Zeke? Tell a story of Uncle Zeke.
One of my favorite stories is that there's this little boy, and he really looked up to his uncle, and his uncle's name was Zeke. And he just seemed so wise. And so one day he asked him, Uncle Zeke, how'd you get to be so wise? And Uncle Zeke says, well, that comes from, hold on, now I got to remember exactly how it goes. It comes from experience.
Yeah.
And experience, well, that comes from, how's it go?
Bad judgment.
Oh, okay, that's how it goes. So I'm totally messing that up. Anyway, so it says, okay, being so wise, that comes from having good judgment. And good judgment, that comes from experience. And experience, Well, that comes from bad judgment.
And this is our, maybe a little bit Southern way. I've seen an old man on a porch in his rocking chair talking wisdom to the next generation. It's such a lacking thing. The enemy has stolen the ability for the elders in our lives through a lot of condemnation, a lot of fault, and of unknown, right? Coming into a better understanding of scriptures, there's a lot of feeling like they don't have much to share. And I think that once we fix, tikkun, is a word in Hebrew they use. It's called, like, there's a fixing or redemption in it. As older men take that place, that they can do this and speak. It says, ask your father and he will show you, your elders, and they will tell you. That's how we remember. That's how we tell the stories. I didn't know that my sons could be so intrigued in some of my youthful days, sitting around a fire, and they're saying, tell that story of this or tell that story of that. They just love the stories. And I think it's because it's a time they've not known, and and I think it's God's way for us to learn. So let's keep going here. I think in Deuteronomy 1:5, it says, and Moses is explaining the words of the law. I looked up that word, and another way to translate it is declaring. And I believe that's really more of the heart behind what Moses is doing. He's declaring the words of the Lord, not so much explaining. A lot of the details of what the Torah portions in Leviticus and in Numbers, there's a lot of details there. It seems here that Moses is more declaring the words of the Lord to this new generation, right? I mean, he's getting ready to go into a lot of years have passed. They've just defeated Sihon and Og, king of Bashan, and he is helping them to remember the things that God did for their parents in coming in through the wilderness. And I think that's very important. He's this grandfather role, right? He's of that generation, and all of their parents have been lost.
Yeah, I think we forget that a lot of times because we're just reading straight through, don't realize how many years, but it's a total new generation who, hopefully heard the stories.
Never planted a crop,
but
never, had to harvest the seasons. There was so much that this generation had never known, but we do know that they were ready to fight.
Yeah, they were ready.
They were ready to go into the promised land. They weren't going to make that mistake again. And so in Deuteronomy 4:9, only take heed to yourself and diligently keep yourself, lest you forget the things your eyes have seen, unless you depart from your heart all the days of your life, and teach them to your children and your grandchildren, unless they depart from your heart. So this is saying, again, teach it to your children, lest you forget the things your eyes have seen. And I think as I look back, it takes time. Reflection is not something that really happens in a moment. And I think it's a big part of why it's necessary for us to take that alone time with the Lord in the morning, or just to slow down a little bit. I mean, you've heard that from us multiple times. This is a farming community. A lot of people around here farm, and there's a waiting. It's hard work, but it's not necessarily mentally exhausting. It's physical work, and it leaves the mind free to really think and to really contemplate and think upon the beauty of the pictures that we get to see every day on a farm and in creation. Deuteronomy 6:6, and these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. I just wanted to mention, as we're ending this week and going into the next, we have the 9th of Av coming up. And the entire purpose of the 9th of Av is repenting for things that have happened in the past. And even Daniel, when he was repenting for things of the past and the things that had happened. And what the Jewish people believe is the cause of the destruction or of that happened on the 9th of Av was baseless hatred. It was a dispute among families and infighting in the different sects of Judaism in the Temple Mount area. And there was just so much infighting and betrayal. And as we're coming to that season in life, we also have the Passover, right? We already talked about multiple verses talking about remembering the mighty deliverance of Egypt. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were remembering these of the faith. We're remembering the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I think the good is for our edification. The bad is so we remember the deliverance, and the ugly is to remember the sanctification. It's this not dwelling on the one thing, but what the Lord has done in that situation. Deuteronomy 4:9, only take heed to yourself and diligently keep yourself, lest you forget the things your eyes have seen. I think I might have read that one just a little bit before. I got that in there twice. But Deuteronomy 4:23 says, take heed to yourselves, lest you forget the covenant of the Lord your God, which he made with you, and make for yourselves a carved image in the form of anything which the Lord your God has forbidden. Forget the covenant. Take heed. Don't forget the covenant. And just a few thoughts on just different things that I saw here. And as we're getting ready to close out here, let's just read this one verse in Job 8:13. So are the paths of all who forget God, and the hope of the hypocrites shall perish. So the hope of the hypocrites shall perish, and the paths of all. So, and that's for all those who forget God, right? It's saying that this is the path of all those that forget God. And to not remember is to forget, right? So it's this different way of saying the same thing. Whose idea was it to send the spies, right? Okay, this is just a couple thoughts I had. Some eyes out there. In the former account, it seems like the Lord tells Moses, hey, choose some men and send them in to spy out the land. In this portion, we see that the leaders of the people come to Moses and they say, hey, we should send in some spies and they should tell us which way we should go up. And Moses says, oh, I thought that seemed like a good idea. And so he did it. And I think it's or it's not this, or I think it's and. So they were basically affirming what the Lord had said, but you can't quite read the context in it. But the testing is definitely evident that the Lord was working in their hearts to send in the spies. Moses says he can't go into the land because of them in this portion, whereas the Lord says, you did not refuse to hallow me. And we see what kind of a little bit of maybe a weakness in Moses as he's saying is because you rebelled, I was angry, and I struck the rock. So it's interesting to note there. One thing that I saw was another thing that was pretty interesting. As they're going through, Moses tells them, we will buy food and water if we go through. And I just thought, why would they buy food and water? They've got manna and the rock. It never occurred to me why they would need to buy food and water that they drink. And as I dwelt on this a little bit, I thought, the Lord is not, if it's in your financial means to fix a situation, then he would seek that you do that, right? And trust him for the finances, right? But when your strength is completely gone and you're in the wilderness, there's no water, there's no food, and there's no way to get it, that's when the Lord will perform a miracle for you. And so I hope that encourages you out there. I really believe that the Lord, if it's in your financial capabilities, he's not concerned about your finances. He's concerned about you. He's concerned about that you wouldn't have anxiety regardless of your finances. And so when we have the resources, we should, and when we can't, we call out to the Lord, and he provides either the finances or he provides the food and the water. So real quickly here, ox knows its owner and the donkey its master's crib, but Israel does not know, my people do not consider. That's Isaiah 1:3. That's from our half Torah portion, going along with this idea that the people are not remembering. They're not considering, not remembering who the people or who their God is, right? Israel does not know, my people do not consider. In Matthew 24:4, it says, take heed that no one deceive you. And how we keep from being deceived is by reminding ourselves of the truth, right? And I just want to tie this all together. We're trying to have a love and purity theme in these Torah portions. And I found a verse that tied it all together very beautifully in Jeremiah 2:2. It says, go and cry in the hearing of Jerusalem, saying, thus says the Lord, I remember you, the kindness of your youth, the love of your betrothal, when you went after me in the wilderness in a land not sown. The Lord says, I remember you, the kindness of your youth, the love of your betrothal. And it's something, we've shared a lot about. It's something that love and purity is very strong about. Victoria and I did betrothal, and it's a picture, as always, of the Lord's love for us and that he remembers us. You know, though he goes away and we're separated for a time, the Lord remembers us, and he who is coming will come, and he will not tarry. So I pray that you would remember the Lord. The Lord would look down and remember us for good, right? He who makes peace in his heights may make peace upon us and upon all Israel, that he would remember us for good in this season of mourning as we remember the times of old in the past and look toward the future with a more experienced eyes, and that we would find great favor in the eyes of the Lord as he remembers us in the kindness of the youth and the love of the betrothal. So I want to end with that. Thank you, Victoria, for being with me and just radiating. And so we want to bless you all with a good week, and pray that you would, again, share this with those that you think might be interested. If it would bless their heart, that's our intent, to bring heaven to earth in your heart and in any place where this might touch and reach. So this is Love and Purity Podcast, calling disciples to a lifestyle of love and purity and joyful expectation for the coming King.
Faith for salvation, ready